so without further ado, I will introduce Cliff Berg. He's a three-in-one man. He was a co-founder and CTO of Digital Focus. So that was a company that grew quite fast, and it was quite successful in building high reliable business critical systems for companies like FedEx and others. He also assembled in 2020 a global team to reimagine Agile, which became the Agile 2 Academy, of which he is a managing partner today. And third, he is also a writer, as you can see. So as of what I say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, he already launched at least 2 books. One of which is his book. Oh, there you go. 6 books. There you go. And so there you go. Cliff Berg in a nutshell. Cliff, if there is anything you'd like to add, feel free.
Well, I'm the most famous person no one knows about. Anyway, okay,
So
let
I'll
me
pass
share.
it all to you.
Okay, thank you, Ines. Yeah, let me share my screen so we can see the beautiful welcome screen. Okay. Aha. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not the artist who created that beautiful screen. Anyway, so today's going to be a little different. So Ines mentioned my company. We're very small. There are only 4, well, kind of 5 of us. One's not shown here. And, you know, in terms of our partners, we work with more people who are consultants who do specialized things. But this is our leadership team. And we have expertise in organizational psychology. That's Marcel. She also has an MBA, a degree in physics, by the way. Raj has a PhD in AI. There's me. Stephen has a long history in change and transformation, and helped with literally hundreds of Lean Six Sigma transformations in different organizations. He was a C-level principal at Raytheon and some other companies. So anyway, we have a good amount of experience in change and transformation. And so anyway, Ines mentioned Agile 2. So Agile 2 is something different. In 2020, was it? Yeah, I think 2020, right during the pandemic, me and a colleague, Lisa Cooney, put a team together of people. We looked for specific skills. And we also wanted people who were not wedded to the status quo, people who had demonstrated they could think independently and think out of the box. And people with experience in like program management and leadership and psychology and behavior and also like system engineering. And so we had a whole chart of expertise. And that team, we worked for like 6 months or so, and we developed Agile 2. So it wasn't a weekend effort. It was a very intentional bottom-up effort where we started as a retrospective, what's working, what's not working, and distilled up core ideas. And that's why the principles of Agile 2 kind of look like independent. It doesn't look too much like a cohesive thing because it wasn't developed top-down. It was developed bottom-up by distilling common ideas across all those people. Anyway, so then some of us formed this company not to create a certification thing or anything like that, but to see if we could help companies be more agile in a real sense. So, agility meaning move quickly, be nimble, be able to change direction quickly and still be effective. And the Agile 2 book, was written in order to kind of explain the thinking. So anyway, kind of enough of that. So what we're going to talk about today is, what does this mean? What does this mean for organizations? And also, what does it mean for us individually? I wrote a blog post not long ago that went viral. So I published it on a Friday night, just completely unplanned. And it reached almost 2 million views within like a few days. Like, what the heck? So it really struck a chord somehow. So anyway, the post was about, Agile is dead, but what does that really mean? Because, Dave Thomas is giving talks saying Agile is dead and so on. And then he says, well, what I really mean is, like, it really went off the rails. We need to fix it. The core ideas, there's some good core ideas. They're not all right, but there's some good stuff. And what should we do going forward? How do we pivot? And so that was the intention. And so anyway, yeah, okay, this is, comes from, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, which I don't buy that. Like, just get on with it. Okay, yeah, this is what I'm going to talk about. Okay, okay, let's actually do it. So this was the post, rest in peace, Agile, and then it said a bunch of stuff like that. But anyway, what was more interesting was the responses. There ended up being 700 comments. By the time I tabulated them, there were 500. And they fell into distinct categories. There are 19 categories that I identified. And I tabulated basically people who were saying the same thing in different ways, which was a lot of work. It took me like all day to go through them, but I did. And the very top thing was Agile is not effective because it comes down to leadership, and that's what really matters. And guess what? That's the thing that is missing from the Agile manifesto. It doesn't say anything about leadership, which is like the most important thing. And people here are saying it's the most important thing. The question is, what is good leadership? Not bad. We don't want bad leadership like the pointy-haired boss, but we do need leadership. And what does that look like? So we're going to look at some of the actual evidence and research about that, including some older things and some recent things. And the second thing was frameworks don't do it. The frameworks don't make you agile. In fact, they're friggin' in the way. They're in the way. They're not training wheels. They're learning blockers. Frameworks are destructive with regard to agility. They might help with some things, like getting planning more transparent. They're not all bad. And they're a great source of ideas. But if you implement frameworks, people stop thinking. And I'll go into that a little more. And this is what people said in the 500 comments I went through. This is what they said. It's not just me saying this. They said it, all these people. Yeah, so the top two things, it comes down to leadership, and then the process frameworks are the problem. So, okay, yeah, and so some other things were, another top one was Agile's too simplistic. Yeah, can you really derive guidance about how to lead organizations from 4 values? No, you can't. It's like a bumper sticker that says, make love, not war. Like, yeah, okay, that's inspiring, but it doesn't give you any guidance about what to do in a given situation. It's useless. The people who understand it and know how to really use that thought don't need it. They've already internalized the idea. The people who don't have experience and don't know how to use it, they're the ones who need it, but they don't understand it. So it's useless to both groups. These short maxims are useless, except maybe as a source of inspiration, like leading the charge. Make love, not war. So, that's not, having a short manifesto doesn't actually help us in terms of figuring out what we need to do. It might mobilize us, but it doesn't help us figure out what to do. And, the response to this, that this went viral, this post here went viral, is basically saying that the industry is saying, people are saying, there's a problem. There's a big problem. It's not working. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work for some people. For some people, anything will work because they're great leaders. If you take away their framework, they'll still be successful. But, Agile somehow is not working. And when I say Agile, I mean the whole ecosystem. I mean, the shared ideas, the common narratives, the frameworks, the this, that, all that stuff. That's Agile with a capital A. We don't have control over who defines that. It's just what it is today in reality in the ecosystem, the reality of what Agile has become. But what agility, the dictionary word, real agility, we can look that up in the dictionary and see what that means. And here's an example of it. So I'm going to have to turn my speaker up so you can hear this. This is a clip from a movie, but it's about a real event. And it was Hurricane Katrina in the US. And there was a hospital that was cut off from everybody for 5 days because there was the water was 10 feet high around the hospital, and they lost power and they ran out of food and water, and people were dying. They had no electricity. People who were on ventilators had to be ventilated with hand pumps for days, and it was just an unbelievable nightmare. And this is a real scene. And the two men in this scene were finance or sales managers. They had no operational role with the hospital. They had no operational role. This was not their job, what they ended up doing.
Well, there's still not enough people on the ground to help everybody, not enough rescue workers, not enough police, certainly not enough people going door to door trying to find the people that are in there. So consequently, people that are making it.
I've been in touch with Memorial. I don't know, maybe they lost power. So the last email I got, fatigue, stress, anxiety, supplies are all issues now. We can't take it. Jesus.
The people inside the city of New Orleans are asking repeatedly today, the people in Washington, are you watching? Are you listening?
For several days now, many people have gone without food, water, and shelter. The residents of New Orleans are literally crying for help.
As you know, the Bush administration has been coming under increased fire from local officials in New Orleans and all across the nation. People unhappy that it's taking so long to get relief to refugees in New Orleans and other affected areas.
I think I might have found some helicopters that can evacuate the patients. They're here in Dallas. They won't be in New Orleans for hours.
Scrambling for rides.
We gotta get court approval. They're not any approvals, just Memorial's not gonna know they're coming.
Just try and you can't get them a message. They gotta hang on. They gotta hang on till those copters get there.
She didn't make it, and tens of thousands still stranded wonder if they will.
So, important point is it wasn't their job to do that. But they saw that they needed to do it, and they acted without approval. And there was no process. There was no agile process, but this was true agility, and there was no process. Process is not how you create agility. Agility is when you realize you need to change the process or go outside of the process. Agility is not a process.
Well, there's still not.
And frameworks block true agility. I'll explain why. So, I know that a lot of people like this, and that's fine, but this is not the way to create agility. This is industrial age thinking, defining this repeating process. Frankly, it's old school. It's old school thinking. It really is. And it actually blocks you from thinking for yourself. And that's not that some people can't get good results with it, but I maintain that the people who get good results with this would get good results with anything, because they are good leaders. They don't need it. And the evidence. So here's Dan Rasky, Dr. Dan Rasky. He's a world expert in spacecraft heat shields, and he's like NASA's top scientist in that. And he spent a year at SpaceX when SpaceX was developing the Dragon capsule, which is what they use today to bring astronauts up to the space station. He spent a year at SpaceX doing a technology transfer to help SpaceX learn how to create the material needed for the heat shield. And he worked very closely with senior people there and with the engineers and interacted with their senior leadership all the time. And had a very good view of how that company worked. He spent a year there every day on the ground.
And with all that going on, we had one standing meeting a week. One, okay, not 15, okay, at NASA. If we were working the same project, oh God, we'd have a dozen standing meetings, you know, and with maybe tens or hundreds of people in each of those meetings, you know, and most people have to do with statusing, right? So most of the time you're sitting and listening, right? Because someone else is talking. And then you find that there's very little time for you to work on your own because you're going from one status meeting to another status meeting to another status meeting.
Yeah.
And so here at SpaceX, we have one standing meeting a week, 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. Okay, so it's in the middle of the week, so you can kind of status in the middle. And it was at 11 a.m. so that when 12 noon came along, everyone wanted to adjourn so we could go have lunch. Okay, and that was it. And that was enough. And with
Yeah. So, you know, no daily stand-up. No daily stand-up at the most agile company in the world. And this is from a discussion with, I don't want to be too specific about his credentials because that would identify him, but he's a top manager in the software realm at SpaceX. And this is pretty recent. You know, he says SpaceX has no agile people or project managers. And we don't use the word agile. We use the word ownership. Everything runs on the 5 rules. For those who have read about SpaceX or Tesla, you might know that Elon Musk has 5 rules of his kind of management paradigm. And it basically goes down to keep things as simple as possible, remove requirements until you find that it doesn't work anymore, and then start adding them back in. It kind of distills it. And by the way, I'm not an Elon Musk fan at all. But SpaceX, you know, and his other companies, we studied SpaceX very closely. There's something magical happening there. And it's not just that they work long hours. They do, and that's because they have their mission driven and they're fanatical about their mission. But the magic is not that, it's how they work and the kinds of leadership that happens there. That's very empowering and very problem focused, solving problems and giving people and groups of people problems to solve instead of defining lots of process. We actually tabulated the management behaviors that we saw at SpaceX, Spotify, Netflix, Google, and Amazon, and matched them and found those common behaviors across all of them. No common processes, no common frameworks. And this gentleman also said, we only speak in terms of problems and ownership, names and dates. From a software perspective, I'd say we run 10 times faster than Capital One or Blizzard Entertainment. You know, it really contradicts what the Agile community advocates for, which is these frameworks and processes. So if it comes down to leadership, well, what kind of leadership? You know, like Genghis Khan leadership? I hope not. But you know, there are lots of leaders. You know, which one is the one to copy? You know, well, I would never copy anyone, you know, just like I wouldn't copy Elon Musk. He's actually very eccentric and very dysfunctional in some ways. So you never want to copy these people. They're not role models, but we can learn from them, like Steve Jobs. You wouldn't want to copy him. He was a narcissist. He was a bully. You know, you don't copy them, but we can learn from things that they do. And the thing about, agility is it emerges when you have effective leaders who behave in certain ways, And what are those ways? And, it can be learned. These are behavioral things, and people can get better. So, there are a lot of people who've studied leadership, and Google spent a lot of effort years ago. There's actually a name for this project. I forget what it is, Project Socrates or something. But they identified statistically, what traits their most effective managers had. Now you think manager, that's not a leader. Well, yeah, good managers are good leaders. A manager is just someone who has a leadership role, meaning they have some authority over something. But to be a good manager, you have to be a good leader. Otherwise, you won't be effective at all. Managers don't just sit and administer. Managers at these kinds of companies need to be good leaders, or they get nothing done. And what Google found is that the best managers, why isn't it moving? Oh, okay. And I was clicking 5 times before it moved. So the best managers are also good coaches in terms of their behavior, in terms of what they did. And they empowered people and were not micromanagers. They didn't get into your work and say, do that and do that and do that and tell you how to do your work. But they also were strong decision makers. And so you might think, well, wait, doesn't that contradict? You empower people and you don't micromanage, but then you make decisions. That seems contradictory. It's not. It's not contradictory because effective leaders know when to decide and when not to decide. They hold back. They say, okay, it looks like they got this, and walk away. And if it looks like there's a problem, they don't say, oh, you're stupid, that's not right, do this instead. They don't say that. They say, why are you doing that? Explain that to me. I want to understand. And they generate a discussion. And, and people have different types. But, the point is that being a good decision maker and making decisions is very important in leadership roles in high-tech companies because time matters. You cannot wait for people to decide. You cannot wait for groups to decide. It takes too long. And you need, if people have discussed something, it needs to be discussed quickly and effectively, and then a decision needs to be made on what to try next without delay. And that's why the decisiveness is so important. It's not to disempower people or bypass them. It's to keep things moving. In the work that we've been doing, we defined a taxonomy of leadership, and there are literally thousands of leadership taxonomies that you can find that people have written down. This is not like an official model or anything. In fact, there isn't one. The leadership taxonomies are very descriptive, and in contrast to models of leadership behavior. But leadership styles are descriptive, and anyone can create their own list of leadership styles. And this is one that we created based on our research in a whole range of leadership taxonomies, because we found that these were really important in the context of product development. Having someone who's visionary, being Socratic, there are a lot of synonyms for that. Basically, being able to have intellectual discussions about things without worrying about whose idea it was. Servant leadership is a set of traits that's very important. It's not sufficient. You need these other things too, but it's an important category of behavior. Being inspirational, being someone who organizes things, someone who takes charge to make decisions so that time doesn't keep ticking. And again, that's what's meant by that is not being a bully. It's just means, okay, we discussed it. Now this is what we're going to do. And then we'll see how that goes. Advocating, so that your work gets the resources it needs, and thought leadership, people who have ideas, what if we try this? What if we try that? So some people are very generative in their ideas, and anyone can be, but you need those ingredients. You need those things to be happening. And so, I mentioned that being a take charge person, what's meant there is not like someone who's like domineering and commanding. It means someone who keeps things moving is what that means. So, decision-making, being decisive is really important in business and technology development. And it's one of the most important behavioral categories. And so decision-making, which again, in terms of Agile thought and the Agile community, gets almost no mention, and yet it's one of the most important things, how decisions get made. And, the Agile community has kind of this culture where, oh, just put a group of people together and they'll figure it out, and that I'm sorry, but that's like a grade school view of decision-making. Decision-making is a process, and there are a lot of behaviors that happen if you study group behavior, and it needs to be done intelligently, and it needs to be moved along. And there's a lot of research about decision-making. It's about complex issues involving technology and how we're going to do the work. It's a cognitively complex activity. People need to be situationally aware of what others are thinking and who looks like they don't agree and why not. And, so it's not a simple thing. And, a lot of people orchestrate decision-making in a very tacit way because they have so much experience. But there's a lot going on in terms of their judgment and how to orchestrate a decision process. And the question is, how do we develop that skill in people? It is a skill. Well, as I mentioned, there is a lot of research on decision-making patterns. And it's not that you should study this research and then like use a template like, oh, I should do this, and now I should do that. No, it's just to make us think, to make us reflect on how we're leading and how we're making decisions and how we're helping other people to make decisions. So it should help us to be more self-aware. Like, how do I make decisions? Do I do any of these things? And how do I do these? How do I make decisions? How do I tend to include other people? How do I tend to help other people make better decisions? How do I tend to observe a decision-making process? How do I observe the outcomes? And what's my behavior when I do these things? And how do emotions impact my behavior? Do I hold on to my ideas? Am I inflexible? Do I not really listen when other people have thoughts? Do I start trying to tell them what I think instead of first finding out what they think? What are my behaviors in that? And, decision-making is not the only thing. I mentioned there are these other kinds of leadership that have to be happening in complex activities like product development. These ingredients, like ingredients of a recipe, they have to be there, and they have to be working together, not at cross purposes, which is a big ask. Groups of people do not naturally all work together well. They don't. I mentioned to my wife once the idea of self-organizing team, and she's a behavioral therapist. She has a degree in that. And she looked at me like I was nuts. Self-organizing team, good luck. That was her response. And a lot of, the Agile community, you hear about the Tuckman model, and people forget that in his research, he pointed out that a lot of teams don't get out of storming. That, they get stuck in there and real conflict develops. And what's happening is that there are people vying for control, whether intentionally or not. They're vying for control. And if one of them wins, then basically the other one shuts down, and then people align with the one who won. And so basically someone's been shut down. And it's and there are psychological theories that explain this. Leader-member exchange theory, it goes into this and how that happens and why that happens. It's not a healthy process. It's not. So these kinds of leadership need to be happening and need to be happening in a constructive way. And so that's why leadership is so important, to align these things and make sure things are going well and are healthy. But how much does it matter? So the responses to that viral post said, yeah, it's all about leadership. But like, does it matter like 10% or 90%? Like, how much does it really matter? Well, it matters a lot. If anyone's read the book Accelerate by Nicole Forsgren, it's a fairly recent book. It actually came out, I think, around the time we started writing the Agile 2 book. I actually sent her a copy. We exchanged some thoughts about the 2 books. But, in that book, which is based on her research with thousands of companies, she found that leadership really does have a powerful impact on results. And, these were all tech companies. And unfortunately, within the DevOps community, I have a feeling that either Gene Kim and Jez Humble were co-authors of the book that she wrote. And I have a feeling one of them wrote this. But unfortunately, within the DevOps community, we have sometimes been guilty of maligning leadership. It's very true. The Agile community is kind of very suspicious of anyone with any kind of authority, which is probably, justified, but getting rid of authority is not the answer. It's like, so like we burned the food, but let's never cook. It's not the solution. And also they wrote, servant leaders focus on their followers' development and performance, which sounds good, but transformational leaders focus on getting followers to identify with the organization and engage in support of organizational objectives. Which is better for the organization? So, the transformational model it goes back a long time. It was, McGregor from years ago, but there's a huge amount of research and writing about transformational leadership. One of my favorite books is by Dr. Marta Wilson. It's called Leaders in Motion. And all her books talk about transformational leadership and how compelling that model of leadership is. Nicole Forsgren also wrote, our analysis found that these characteristics of transformational leadership are highly correlated with software delivery performance. In fact, we observed significant differences in leadership characteristics among high and low performing teams. High performing teams reported having leaders with the strongest behaviors in terms of transformational leadership. Huge correlation between having transformational team leaders and not. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. Later in the book, they mentioned that they found that just having transformational leadership wasn't enough to be, that also the teams needed to have good working knowledge of technical practices and lean principles. So, the model that we, Agile 2 Academy, have developed of actual agility involves behavior and knowledge. And these are the 2 things, behavior and knowledge. Transformational leadership is behavioral. Good technical practices and knowledge of lean patterns, that's knowledge. The 2 together, that's what works. So what about product development in terms of the kinds of leadership that you need in product development? Is that special? Is that like different from like Gandhi, where he tried to transform a country, and, other situations. And it is somewhat different. It is. And the thing is, in complex domains where like product development is really what we focus on, you need to start with questions, not with answers. And that's what's wrong with the frameworks. The frameworks are answers. And we never asked the question. And therefore, we didn't do the thought process of figuring out how we should do our work. And therefore, we skipped the learning. We skipped the thinking it through and the learning. And therefore, we're effectively painting by numbers. We should be asking questions to begin with, like, how can we ensure that we deliver value?
Sorry for interrupting, Cliff. There is a question on
Sure.
in the chat. So, question from Maru. I haven't looked into the Agile to work since over a couple of years, but did you guys evolve the map of interplay and competencies and traits that help with Agile leadership in organizations?
Well, it's a separate thing. Agile 2 is Agile 2. There's no updating Agile 2. It was done by 15 people. It was a nonprofit activity. It's been published. It's done. It was what those 15 people thought were behaviors that actually promote true agility. But my company, Agile 2 Academy, has done a lot of work. We've collaborated with other companies that specialize. For example, Human Synergistics has deep experience with organizational culture. And so we wanted to understand what cultural traits are important, like as precursors for these behaviors, or how they work together, how culture relates to behavior. And, so we do have, I don't know if I'd call it a competency model, but, we do have a description or list, if you will, of the behaviors that seem to be very consistent across highly agile companies. I think there are 14 of them or something. And, so our work, a lot of what we do, we work with organizations to, you always start with a question, just like I'm talking about here. What are you trying to solve? What are you trying to do? And what do you think is in your way? It's so-called appreciative inquiry. Why do you think you're not achieving that? And then you help them to understand it better. And we have tools, we have surveys and assessments and so on. And we interview and talk to people and help them to figure out cause and effect and what they need to change. And one of our most powerful tools is we have a curriculum for helping them to understand better these cause and effect relationships and what leadership actually looks like, and the cause and effect and communication and how people actually communicate effectively and decision making. And so training people and helping them to get better at those things is part of our model. I'll talk about that at the end, actually, a little bit. I think Mike has a question. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Cliff. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, good. Haven't spoken to you in a while. Just a quick question based on what you just said there. Are you suggesting that Agile 2 is immutable?
Yeah. Yeah, because just like a book is immutable, it's been published, just like a work by an artist is immutable. But that doesn't mean that you should treat the ideas as immutable. It just means it was published and the work is done. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to evolve your own thoughts. Just like the Agile manifesto is immutable, it was published and is done, but it's a point in our learning journey. For each of us, it's a point in time of what we read and then think about, and it's our own thoughts. So would I personally change Agile 2 if I could? No, I've moved on from it. You know, it was a hugely thought-provoking process. And I think it's very solid. But you know, I probably would have written it differently. You know, I didn't write it. Those people wrote it. I contributed a tiny bit, maybe 1% or something. But they wrote it, the way they wrote it is what it was. And the way I would have changed it 3 years ago is probably different from how I would change it today. You know, so these ideas always need to evolve. And I don't feel a need to go and update Agile 2. It's, you know, there is no Bible for this stuff. This is human behavior. There's no definitive set of rules. What works for one person might not work for another. I don't know if
That answered my question.
it probably doesn't answer your question, but
No, it
could
certainly
do.
did. And thank you.
Sure. So, you know, a big point here is start with questions. Start with the questions so that you think through. And these frameworks are not bad if you view them as ideas. If you view them as ideas, and I would propose it's better to first try to think of your own idea and then look at if the framework has an idea. Because then you're not locked in your thinking. You haven't been prejudiced by what the framework says. Always start with questions. And if you have a group of new people who are inexperienced, this is especially important because they don't have experience on what worked for them. So, you know, you should start with new people on like, how can we make sure the product works reliably? Get them thinking about it, have them building a mental model and use a discussion with them to help through. Well, what if we did this? And what if we did that? What effect would that have? They're building an understanding. How can we make sure that we obtain feedback early on? You know, what they come up with might look like Scrum, or it might be very different from Scrum. You don't know. You don't know. And whatever they come up with will probably work well for them. And it should probably get better over time. The way that we learn, you know, for complex things is first realizing what the right questions are. They're just figuring out what the right question is a thought process. What matters here? What should I be asking? You know, are these questions, you know, why does value matter so much? Maybe it doesn't. You know, if I'm building something where I just have to do an ETL of some data, maybe value doesn't matter. It's cut and dry. It needs to do this, period. Or maybe value is everything. So figuring out what are the right questions is the most important first step. And then coming up with answers. And then, you know, if you start with a framework, you basically are starting with the answers. You're going backwards. And so I like the metaphor of painting, you know, and if imagine someone's learning to paint, I mean, artistically paint, not paint a house, you know, so if someone's learning how to paint, they say they don't have natural talent at painting, most people don't, and they're learning how to paint, and say you give them a paint by numbers thing. Well, they'll paint something, they'll paint that thing with numbers, but it won't look very good. It'll be nice enough to hang in your kitchen maybe, but probably not in your living room. Or maybe. My mother used to kind of go nuts painting things. One time I came home and she had painted our front door gold using model car paint and a small brush. You can imagine what it looked like. So people have different standards for what they hang in their living room. But anyway, so if you use paint by numbers, you'll get that. And if you keep doing that for several years, you'll keep getting that. You won't get any better because you've never really learned how to paint. You've never really learned how to paint. And it's just like using a framework. You never learn how to really think for yourself. You just learn how to do that framework well. You learn how to paint by numbers well. So real carefully so you don't go outside the line. but you don't really learn how to think about what works. And a framework locks you in to its paradigm. And in psychology, this is called functional fixedness. Where this is a very powerful effect, where if you give someone the answer right off the bat, it becomes very hard for them to think of anything outside of that answer. And this is you can even see this in brain imaging. They have this effect. You give someone the answer first, you give them Scrum to begin with, and they find it very hard to think of any other way. But if you didn't give them that, they would have thought of all kinds of other ways. So, these paradigms, a lot of people, I hear them saying, well, Agile is defined by the Agile manifesto, like as if that's authoritative in terms of what creates agility. It's not. It's not. There's no reason to think that agility is created by following the Agile manifesto. The Agile manifesto was written by some people at a point in time. It's not based on any theory or research or anything. It was just their opinions at that point in time. And it's not bad, but it's missing leadership, the most important thing of all. So it's not authoritative. It's some ideas to consider, but it's not definitive. Is there a question? Okay. So, if you give someone a framework, they find it very hard to think outside that framework. And that's why, frameworks again aren't bad, but you shouldn't start with the framework. You should first start with the questions. And then after you've thought it through, check out some frameworks for ideas. Because you've already gone outside the framework. So your thinking is now open. You've built a model of what you need. And now that's the time to start looking at frameworks for ideas. And use the patterns and frameworks as ideas, not as things to copy. Like, what's the reason for that practice? Oh, that's a good thought. Yeah, we need that, but not that way. I would do it differently because of our situation. Don't copy practices. Take the idea and then think how you would implement that idea in your situation. So, I think someone asked like what we do or our model or something. So we actually have a model. It's called constructive agility, and it's not a framework or template or anything. It describes a learning path. And it describes a path of identifying the questions, and progressively answering those in more detail as you grow your initiative, and which is exactly the process that people go through, and when they're not constrained by a framework. And in terms of how to develop better leaders, leadership, like anything, is a learning journey, and it can be taught and coached and mentored. And when we work with organizations, we start with questions to help them understand their situation and what they're trying to achieve. But at the last bullet, ultimately, it's a learning journey for people. And we do have a tool set, which is mainly the curriculum that we have, but also our assessments. And we have a dashboard where the assessment results are shown in real time, so the organization can see how they're improving over time. But that's not what this talk is about. And what can we do as individuals? Well, don't start with frameworks. I see in Reddit all the time, people are asking, I want to get better. What certification should I get? Don't get any. Don't waste your time. Study real things. get some books about leadership and behavior and communication and cognitive science. Learn how the work is done. Take a programming course if you don't know that. Get a cloud certification. That's a real certification because it actually enables you to do something. Learn more about the business that your organization is in. And these are some books that I happen to like. I mean, there are many, many more, but these like really are kind of at the top of my recommendation list. And A Seat at the Table was written by Mark Schwartz, who I worked for years ago, as CIO of the Immigration Service, very, very out of the box thinker. He was a CIO who would do programming on the weekend because he wasn't a programmer, he wasn't technical. He had an MBA from Wharton, but he taught himself programming on the weekend just so he could get a feel for what people were doing. And he would go around and talk to programmers. What are you doing? Explain it to me. He was very kind of, really practiced Gemba in the true sense. Leading the Transformation by Gary Groover. He was in charge of software development at HP for their embedded systems and also desktop applications. And his book is amazing. It's only like 100 pages or something, but he talks about how he shifted the thinking of the business so that they didn't fill up the backlog 3 years out, so that to retain flexibility and keep things agile in a real sense. And then, of course, Accelerate and Team Topologies, which I was fortunate to be able to actually have coffee with Manuel Pais, author of Team Topologies, when I was in Spain a little while back. And Turn the Ship Around is not about software, but it's a tremendous leadership story and about what it means to be the two sides of being the decision maker, but also empowering people, and how that trade-off can manifest. And Rethinking Agile by Klaus Leopold challenges a lot of things that we take for granted. And beyond Agile, there's so many other things, like Leaders in Motion, I mentioned, by Marta Wilson, and Focus by Daniel Goleman, about how people think. Because when we're working on things, we're thinking. We're not collaborating all the time. Especially in technical work, you spend most of your time thinking, not collaborating. Collaborating is 10%, thinking is 90%. And Working Backwards is a fantastic story of the arc of Amazon, and why they've been so incredibly successful. And it's because there's a culture of systems thinking and looking holistically at how everything works, including how people think and how people collaborate and how people work and how people make decisions, embedded from the very beginning. And Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is an unbelievable book about human cognitive processes. And Creating Constructive Cultures is about organizational culture. Fantastic books. But the first 3 chapters will just blow you away, and the rest of it is case studies. And Beyond Budgeting, if you haven't read about Beyond Budgeting, please do. And it's Agile, how finance impacts agility. And Recoding America and Quiet. And this is a classic, Corporate Culture and Performance, because, it's by John Kotter. He did a research on what effective companies, what kinds of leadership they actually had. And Conscious Capitalism's written by the founder of Whole Foods. And it's a little bit slanted, the book, but all books are a little bit slanted. But Whole Foods is a consumer company. They don't develop products, so that's a little bit different. If you read that, keep that in mind. But the point here is to go beyond Agile and look at behavior and these things. And there's some pointers on our website you know, if you go to this address, we actually have, you know, actually have some links. This is just some of them to different leadership models that are foundational, and some references. And that's it. So I'd love to have discussion or questions or anything. Okay, the first hand I see is Adrian Baraciano.
Sorry, I was just applauding you. Thank you for that presentation.
Oh, thank you. Oh, okay. I don't know, is that or that?
Thank you, Cliff. Thank you so much. That was really, really, really good. I definitely learned a lot today. I think Mike has a question. I think he's raising his hand.
Okay, hi, Mike.
Hey. Yeah, there seems to be a degree of synergy, Cliff, between what you're saying or proposing, at least at the beginning of the journey, which is analyzing the question, and Cynefin. Have you ever analyzed the overlap or synergy between those two approaches?
You mean the Cynefin framework?
Ironically, yeah.
Yeah. You know, for years and years, I called it Sinophen, and I think that's a better pronunciation based on how it's spelled. But you know, so perhaps, you know, I mean, you know, so the Cynefin framework is basically a situational leadership model. I mean, it's a complexity. It's based on the idea that depending on, you know, complexity is one of the factors that help to determine how you should operate a project or lead a project. But it's not the only factor. You know, if you have people who've dealt with that complexity before and they're really good at it, you might lead it differently. You know, the complexity might not be the determining thing. You know, so it's definitely something to consider. You know, complexity is a complex topic.
Yeah, so I think Cynefin goes a little further than just looking at complexity, and I think what Dave Snowden was, certainly my interpretation of what he was trying to explain, was we need to look at the problem domain, and once we understand what the problem domain is, we then can have strategies in terms of trying to find a solution for it. So different domains lead to different types of or are optimized for different types of solutions, which is largely what I think you were saying. Be pragmatic in the approach that you take. Don't be rigid. You know, you don't solve every single problem exactly the same way. So I think there's a quite a bit of synergy between the two approaches.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. You know, the reason I'm pausing is because you kind of opened up a whole area. I'm trying to figure out what to say and what not to waste people's time with. But you know,
always leave it just as an open question for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, complexity. I've studied a lot of different kinds of complexity. Lagrangian complex systems and their ergodic theorem, and statistical physics. I studied statistical physics in my degree, and you know, in complex adaptive systems, and the work of John Holland. You know, there are a lot of kinds of complexity, and you know, organizations are kind of funny in that, you know, they are complex their organizations are complex adaptive systems, but not entirely. You know, because you know, a complex adaptive system, I don't want to go off too much of a tangent here, but it evolves on its own. It's an ecosystem. But you know, leaders have intention, and they must short circuit that evolution. Otherwise, the organization becomes chaotic, you know, and that won't survive. You know, an organization that's chaotic will continue to evolve. And you know, if you view the organization as a member of a larger complex adaptive system, in complex adaptive systems, most innovations die. You know, evolution happens because most mutations result in an organism that can't compete and they die. So if you just allow it to evolve naturally, it will die 99% of the time. You'll have teams that fail and finally one will succeed, but the company will go out of business. So the major job of managers is to prevent the system from being a complex adaptive system and make it as deterministic as they can without killing innovation. So there's a trade-off. That trade-off is kind of the magic decision point. I think the decision about how to oversee something, you're exactly right, that you want there to be freedom to innovate, but you also want to get to an actionable, effective outcome soon, because time matters. And so you have to try and make it somewhat deterministic, but you also want to allow the possibility that people will think of things you're not thinking of, and so you mentioned like trying to understand the domain, I think is a key strategy in trying to make a better decision about that. But the short answer is you're absolutely right. It's definitely highly related. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do you mind if I throw a second question your way?
Please.
I've been doing a lot of research at the moment, as I'm sure everybody is, with AI and robotics. Do you think that paradigm shift fundamentally changes the approach that you take or advocate for?
No, actually, I think, agility is more important than ever. I think that, AI is going to make some people more effective. But it's also going to make things more unpredictable. It's actually, when I talk about it with my colleagues, we always decide if we're talking about the next 5 years or the next 10 years, because it makes a big difference.
Yeah, I was about to ask you that. In fact, that would have been my follow-up is, does your answer change? Because obviously at the moment you get a lot of AI co-pilots, so you get tools that you could use to assist you. But in 10 years' time, we're going to have a lot more agents where we have far more autonomous AI. And I think paradigmatically, that's when things become a little more interesting. And AGI, I think, will make it equally another paradigm shift. But
yeah, I mean,
I guess I pose it more as a question for the audience to think about, because I'm not sure that anybody in the world really has all the answers about what AI is going to be like in 10 years.
We're sleepwalking through it. There are a lot of people who aren't asleep and are paying close attention, but they're not in control. The people in control are like leading us sleepwalking. It's a huge existential issue, and why are we worrying about inflation when we have AI on the horizon? It's like they don't compare in terms of magnitude of impact. So why are people worried about, these comparatively little things when we have something, AI is going to make climate change look like a pimple, so, but, that's the world we're in, and none of us knows what's going to happen. So, I mean, the arc looks kind of clear, but we don't really know. Because we don't know what we don't know.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cliff.
Thank you, Mike. Does anyone else have any questions for Cliff? Oh yeah, Maru.
Yeah, thanks, Ines. Cliff, if you allow, I'd like to go back to get back to the topic you shortly alluded to with regard to character traits and more psychological attributes of a group of a team that you started talking about. Could you elaborate whatever you tell us on that is going to be an advantage for me against AI. So whatever you tell me is going to help me.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question. Are you saying what traits are of advantage in the new AI environment?
No, the AI part was a joke. I was referring to what you said earlier about the fact that you recognized about 14 behaviors that seem to indicate that a certain group, a team, is closer to Agile. Yeah. But to
So
the benefits of being Agile.
So what are those behaviors? Or
Yeah,
Oh.
and anything else. Yeah.
Well, I don't have the list in front of me, but the ones I can remember off the top of the head is, one of them was the strong expectation by leaders that people will try things before being sure. So, and in organizations that have, kind of a cultural norm where you can't make mistakes and you have to dot all the I's and everything has to be just right. People won't do that. They'll try to create complete perfect plans before they're ready, and or they won't share a document that they're still working on. It's not ready yet. It's not ready. And what we saw in these highly agile companies is the expectation that you will try things before you're completely sure. Say, I think that's going to work, but I'm not sure. Well, let's try it and see what happens. But in a safe way. It doesn't mean, release a new product to the world that you're not sure they'll like. That's not a good idea. But maybe release it to a very small beta group. If you think you have a way to solve an engineering problem or a software problem, think it through. Don't be reckless. But when you think it will work, don't sit, reviewing it for the next 2 weeks. Try it. That's a strong cultural expectation. Is in the sense that when people in leadership roles hear and they discover that people are hesitating, they say, why are you waiting? How come you haven't tried it yet? There's that strong expectation that people will. And so that, because what that does is that creates psychological safety. Psychological safety is not the result of tolerating failure. That's the wrong narrative. That's the wrong lens. It's the wrong interpretation. No company wants failure, period. No company wants failure. No one wants failure, even in little things. No one wants it. You have it, but no one wants it. But if there's an expectation that people will try things and keep it moving, then things fail often. But they fail in a trial mode. The beta test didn't go well. We tried that new version of the part and it blew up on the test stand. We tried this new microservice design and it was even slower than the other one. So you try it. And if people try things before being sure, then half the time it doesn't work. And that becomes normal. That becomes normal. And so people aren't afraid of it anymore. And especially if the way it gets discussed is, that's surprising. Why is the service even slower? I guess we're wrong because you know what? I think these kinds of queries are just going to be slower than we thought they were. Now we know. We'll have to go back to the old design. And so that rational issue-focused discussion becomes normal. And this idea of embracing failure is the wrong way to look at it. Really, it's about embracing trying things before you're sure, and then having rational discussions about it. There's no blame, there's discussion. That's the healthy culture, and has nothing to do with like embracing failure. It's more about just being rational and keeping things moving. You know, so those are some of the traits. There are others. In fact, they're actually on our, the top 6 are on our website, but somewhere. But those are some of them. If I can think of another one. Another one is, you know, I can't think of them all offhand. Those are some big ones.
Yeah, thanks.
Sure.
When you work with clients, and how do you deal with the, you know, the natural rejection of extra work, like thinking work? Because, you know, you're not being paid to think. That's it's something nobody's going to tell you. You're being paid to do the work. I mean, I paid you because you have degrees, you have experience. You're not here to think. You're here to do the work. Have you been faced with this before? Are people just open to start developing frameworks by themselves?
Well, you don't want them developing frameworks by themselves. You do want them focused on the work, but thinking is part of it. You know, in product development, people spend most of their time thinking. You know, and you know, if people in leadership roles are equating thinking with not doing work, then their ideas about the work are really distorted. You know, it's not clerical work. It's not mindless. Product development, you know, is craft and creative. It's a combination of craft work and creative work. They're both work. Creative work for technology is mostly thinking. You know, if you look at programmers or engineers, go to a room where they're programmers and engineers and walk around and look at what they're doing, they're sitting there looking at a screen. And most of the time they're not typing, they're thinking. And in terms of programming, programmers spend 90% of their time trying to figure out why something doesn't work. They spend 90% of their time trying to figure out, this should work, why doesn't it? You know, they design something and write code, and then they run it and it doesn't work. Why not? And then they have to put in diagnostics and tests and so on to figure out, that's why it doesn't work. And then they quickly change that. So now they've made a change, and that's, you know, in that manager's mind that you just described, that's the only work. So they spent an hour and then they spent 10 seconds typing more code. So they only spent 10 seconds of work in the last hour. What about the other, you know, 59 minutes and 50 seconds where they were thinking? You know, that's work too. You know, so you know, programming is, it doesn't work, figure out why, fix that. Then it still doesn't work in a different way. So you spend time, diagnose that, figure it out, you're stumped, put in more tests, wait for the build, wait for it to run. You basically are just sitting there waiting for that. And then you see a result and why doesn't, aha, okay. And then you fix that, takes 10 seconds. And then again, and so finally you solve the last problem and finally the whole thing works. You know, you've spent 90% of your time stuck. So are you not working? Of course you're working. You know, so their attitude is wrong. You know, most of product development is thinking. You know, what do we do? You know, we haven't encountered someone with that distorted a view. You know, most managers we deal with have understood that there's a huge thinking creative component in building technology. You know, I've not encountered anyone in a long time who didn't know that. So that hasn't been an issue. You know, one of our major clients is a research institute, and they're all scientists. They spend most of their time thinking. I mean, that's what they do. They do run experiments, but most of their time is thinking. That's what they're supposed to do. Anyway.
That's very good. Thank you, Cliff. I don't know, Maru, if this answers your question. Or
Yeah,
if
I
you
mean,
have-
it does answer it in the sense that he hasn't Cliff didn't encounter people like that. I mean, the rest is preaching to the choir. I mean, obviously, that's yeah. I mean, yeah, but in fact, my own experience has been very, very different, especially in the heat of daily grind. But yeah, I guess if you have you're lucky enough to meet people with that kind of attitude and view of real work, what it is, instead of just treating everything as a cost cutting uh, initiative, then it's a great environment to work in. I wish that for everyone.
Well, I would ask, you know, if those people have ever done that type of work themselves. You know, if they haven't, then that might be the issue. Because, you know, if you don't really understand the work, then you assume that it's simple. You know, you assume that it's just cut and dry. But, you know, people who have been engineers or have been programmers and then are in a leadership role, they know what's involved, you know. So, you know, maybe, I don't know if that is a part of the issue in your situation. But people who lead others doing work should have a basic understanding of that work. Otherwise, they don't understand what the issues are and what the challenges are and what the people are actually doing.
Yeah, totally agree. You need to have understanding and respect for the domain. In many cases, respect is lacking. That's in my personal view, kind of leads to a distorted view of people. You apply the wrong models of the world to a domain you don't understand at all. You treat it like I said, if you treat everything as a finance exercise, you're gonna end up with a results of a finance exercise, which is in total mismatch with the real work being done. So respect for me and understanding of the business of the domain, whatever it is required.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I personally think, just last remark, with regard to the AI discussion earlier, I really think that if people use it right, they can expand their coverage of multiple domains and therefore deal with more complexity, with more clarity about that complexity, and in better ways, or more different angles around that complexity, with the support of some more automation and some more, more less complex work that can be covered by some AI support. I think that's my personal hypothesis. Let's see how that evolves over the years. But we'll need more generalists that go deeper than specialists, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're referring to AI, right? I might have missed, but I think you're talking about.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, we'll see. You know, I've seen studies where, you know, AI was able to help junior people become productive very quickly. But I agree with you. I think the big impact is going to be in helping people, you know, who are more generalist and more experienced be more effective. You know, I think people are going to, you know, be able to say, well, you know, what if what if we, instead of use aluminum, build the airplane out of titanium? What will that look like? And it will figure it out, you know. And so I don't know, will that make people lazy? You know, so it's like you know, people aren't good at arithmetic anymore because they use calculators, you know, so engineers won't really know how to design things anymore because the AI does it. But I don't know, you know, I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe we'll have people who, you know, just because they like it, stay in the details, you know. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting. It's going to definitely, this is a unique period in time. So I've decided, instead of being afraid of it, to just become an observer. You know, we're on quite a ride. I mean, this is, you know, where AI and other things are headed. It's unprecedented in history. And it's, unique. There's never been a moment like this. So it's history writing itself.
Great discussions. Thank you so much, Maru. And thank you so much, Cliff. We have 1 minute left. Does anyone would like to put last question before we close?
I could ask something, but it will take more than a minute. I back in the day before Scrum, I learned Agile and it was all based on principles really. And then Agile came along, or rather Scrum came along, and everybody sort of ran down that road. And now everybody seems to say, everywhere I go, we want Scrum. And they talk a little bit about Kanban, and it's all Scrum, this Scrum, and doing sprints and all of this. And it's almost hard to make yourself heard when you talk about running experiments, or you talk about some of the principles of waste and of this. And, I'd say thanks for this presentation, because I think I'm going to go away from I'm not sure. I'm going to go away from the framework and just perhaps ignore it almost, and just, I'll do it, but it's there, it's a thing. But is it right to perhaps just focus on these principles that Hop and Dick and these sort of people came up back in the 90s? They came up with this, and when I talk about it, people just glaze over and say, "What's that got to do with Agile?" And you think, "What? It's like, how did you get here? That you just follow this framework? You think it's Agile? So is it right to preach? Is it right? Well, I'm not saying it's right to preach the principles rather than Scrum itself. And I see this as a positive thing, because I think it's time to let go of Scrum. And people say Agile, but I think it's time to let go of it. Even Kanban can be a little bit prescriptive. There's some of the, these gurus who talk continuously about interpreting cumulative flow and all this sort of stuff. I think, yeah, it's okay. It's all very scientific, but actually what you said today was more interesting about leadership, because that's where the problems seem to rise. Like you get somebody swans in and says, how are they getting on? And you say, well, they're not really sure what they're building. And yeah. Can you spare the time to sit down with us and just go through your thoughts? And they can't, we've given you Scrum and thing. So yeah, I don't know if that was a question or a rant. Sorry about that.
Actually, Rex, you kind of nailed something really important that I didn't talk about at all. Before the 90s, there were no frameworks really for software development, at least none that kind of were followed by the majority of people. Basically companies would put a project manager on a team and then hope for the best.
Yeah.
And then during the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, PMI came out with, their stuff. And it was an attempt to make project management repeatable. And they defined all these steps where if you create this document and this document, then it's like management by numbers. It's like, painting by numbers. And so what that did is it transformed project management into an administrative activity. And so instead of actually talking to people and immersing yourself in the issues, like you just described, people started trying to manage it from a distance, like operating puppets. And it didn't work. And, Agile pushed back on that, but then Scrum reintroduced it. It reintroduced that kind of idea that you can manage from a distance. Just run these ceremonies, just ask these questions, and it operates itself. And that doesn't work. What works is actually talking to people about the actual issues. Have one-on-one discussions, have little group discussions, whiteboard, think it through, decide what to do next. You don't need a process. You don't need a framework. Be issue focused. frameworks aren't needed.
No, you're right.
Scrum is a reintroduction of what PMI tried.
And then we also had CMMI, you know, and how to code in, you know, the process of how to code, you know, really. Anyway, let's leave it there with that. But thanks for the talk, Cliff. That's very insightful.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Just really quickly, Rex, can I just suggest, have a look at what Alistair Coburn wrote about Shuhari Kokoro. So he extended the Shuhari idea in Heart of Agile, and it's the reversion to simplicity. I think you'll enjoy it.
I love Alistair. You know, I usually disagree with him, but what he says is always insightful.
Yeah.
He makes me think, you know, what? Go ahead.
The other thing that I'm quite a fan of is kata coaching. You know, the idea of it being a series of experiments, not just and I know everybody, when are we going to deliver? You know, it's all, when are you going to do this, and when's this going to be built, and that, it's all. But ultimately, there's an awful lot of value in actually experimenting, like you say, and giving, maybe just giving people license to go and do that, rather than looking at it as a sort of a covert thing that they shouldn't be doing. They're wasting time. Actually make it legitimate for them to actually go and experiment and be visible with it. So, you know, share it with people and so on. Very, very powerful. But yeah, okay, I get your point, Mike. Yeah, very interesting. I think I'll have a read up on some more of this sort of stuff. You know, I don't want to put my head up over the battlements too often, though. You know, take one for the team again.
Right.
That's fine.
Right. The voice of reason getting shot down again and again.
Yeah. No, let's just do what we've done always and just keep doing it repeatedly and see what see where it gets us. Yeah, that's fine.
If you allow me, guys, there is like this very good story I actually have from this week that I think is a true representation of everything that Cliff said and you guys also commented. I have this other product manager coming to me this week. He just got his PMS certification, which he's really proud of. And when I arrived at the company a year ago, they had this definition of done and definition of ready for the company. There's never been reviewed in the last 2 years, and no one really even knew where it was. So if I asked the developer what it was, he said, "Oh, where is that?" And they didn't know what was the contents of those definitions. So I proposed that the teams were able to create their own. And I got a lot of resistance from the company saying like, "Oh, that's not Scrum." As in, what we need to do is Scrum. And I said, well, but what benefits are we collecting? Because the teams are not even aware of the definitions as much as following them. So we are getting no benefits or practical results out of it. But still, all I could hear was, no, this needs to be, the definitions need to be done by leadership, and we need to review this as a company. But as you can imagine, the last 2 years did not been reviewed and nothing was done to review them. So I just went ahead and I guess I went against the whole system, and my teams created their own. And what we got from that was that we were not getting imposed by anything anymore, any Scrum rule or whatever, which I don't even think it's a Scrum rule that we cannot have our own, but anyway. And the team thought about it and owned that definition. They believe in it and now they follow it.
Yeah.
And this is the power of agility, because this is what agility is. They were given the space and the capability to just do it and just resolve an issue by themselves. Yeah. And this week, that same project manager said to me, "Oh, now I have this certification and I know for sure what you did is wrong and we need to undo it." And I asked, okay, what is the objective here? What is the problem we're trying to solve? Because what I'm hearing is that we need to go back, and when we were back, no one was following definition. So, and the reason that was given was that there is a possibility that our team members rotate into different teams. And so people will lose, because there will be different definitions of done and ready between teams, then they will not know what to do. And I asked, when did that happen? And I got a bit of silence, and then that's not the point, because it can happen in the future. So my conclusion was, we're not trying to solve any problem. We were just so close-minded to following a process that we couldn't see anything else but that.
Yeah.
And it's the lack of mindset completely. There is no agility mindset, or the idea of solving something and using the process to actually do that, but being so embedded on following a process that was institutionalized that we even forgot why we're doing it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that story.
The tyranny of process. Yeah. You know, process can be important, you know, if you have safety critical processes, you know, but, you know, it's a balance. You know, it's a balance. There's judgment, you know, just having the attitude, we have to have universal processes and everybody must follow them no matter what, is a killer. You know, it's, you know, it just gridlocks everything.
Yeah, 100%. Still waiting for that meeting though, so that meeting will happen when I will be forced to like go back. Obviously I will try to argue against it, but there you go. There is a question from Tom. Do you quantify all value objectives?
Quantify that? You can't. You can't. You know, a lot of times value is indirect. You know, so I mean, value, you know, what is value? But, you know, if for a company, a for-profit company, it's economic value. And economic value is a market value, you know, and if you have a component like a microservice that's used by different products, you can't put a value on. You can only put value on entire end-to-end scenarios that actually reach the customer. You know, so you can't, and that's why you know, you actually can, but it involves a lot of math and probably simulations and data that you don't have. So in practice, you can't, and it's a matter of judgment, you know. And value is not the only consideration. You also have to consider, you know, what options something gives you or takes away. And, you know, so, I mean, that actually can be phrased as value too. That's something called real options analysis. But, you know, it's for the kinds of decisions, you know, if you're putting value on like a nuclear power plant, yeah, you can completely do an economic analysis and compute value. If it's something that is a small decision, you can't. And so it comes down to judgment. It's judgment about value and usefulness and what options it opens up for you. I don't know if that addresses the question. Yes, no?
Tom is adding more comments to the chat. I don't know if Tom, if you'd like to speak out.
Yes, I believe, and I put a little booklet in the chat called Quanteering that will help prove it to those who don't know how to do that all critical stakeholder value ideas can be expressed quantitatively, and that helps us do better decision making and many other things. And if you don't know how, Cliff, I would love to respectfully change your mind if you give me a chance. But take a look at that Quanteering book for starters.
Well, you know, I wrote a book called Value Driven IT that has a lot of the math in doing those kinds of things.
Yeah.
You know, and I even built a simulator for modeling value. But you know, I would love to see what what techniques you use, I think, I don't want to totally discount it. There can be heuristic techniques where you can have a ballpark value and look at trade-offs. This has more value or less value. Maybe that's what you're getting at. Calculating an absolute value is very difficult, and probably, would have such error margins that it's not useful. But
Yeah.
in terms of this has more value, this scenario or this decision path has more value than that decision path, I think can be done. But I'd love to see what techniques that you have.
Okay, I put them in the quite a few pieces in the chat, and I'll be happy to send them to you by email when I figure out what your email is. And I'll be happy to talk to you and convince you of anything you think cannot be easily quantified.
I don't want to.
And I'll do it right here and now if we have the time, but I assume we don't.
So my email actually, I think, can be obtained. If you send it to that, it will come. I'm one of the, that's actually a group email, and I will receive it. I'm one of the recipients of contact@agile2academy.com. And then if you send to that, I'll reply
use that
and give you my direct email address.
That's fine. I'll do that.
Okay.
Yeah. By the way, I think your framework of ideas is great. I'm 100% behind it. And I think it would be even better if you could do things like quantify values, which I hope to convince you you can do.
I would love to see your techniques. I went down the value path many years ago, and I ended up deciding it was very time consuming to do that, but there might be techniques to do it quickly. And I would love to.
There are. We're talking under 5 minutes type things.
Okay, that would be wonderful.
But
yeah.
But I'll send you the details, and I will personally argue privately to convince you, or let you convince me of otherwise.
I would love it. I look forward.
Okay.
I look forward to receiving.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for your talk. I hope to spread your idea set, which I hardly agree with.
Thank you, Tom.
Sorry, could I just ask, Tom, does your booklet look to quantify subjective domains as well?
Yes.
Okay,
anything that varies, like any quality, any value, anything where you can say more or less, there's the giveaway. In fact, you can say more or less of this indicates there's potential for quantification. And if you take a look at the quantiering book that I put in the chat, you'll get all the information you need in detail.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Pleasure, Mike. Do contact me if you want more information.
Thank you, guys. We have one last question from Sheila, and that's the last one we are gonna take, because it's already 8:18. Sheila, you wanna go ahead?
Hi, Sheila.
Maybe she gave up.
Might have stepped away.
Couldn't figure out how to unmute.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there you go.
It was just, I'm using my iPad, and it's not as easy as using the computer. Yeah, I was talking about even when PMI came out with their original SDLC, there were lots of SDLCs around. And in the SDLCs and I actually wrote one at a hospital system in New York, and we had a menu. It wasn't a monolith. It was never a monolith. It was like, if you're doing this kind of thing, you need to do this subset. If you're doing something more complex, you may need to do these other things. It's kind of, I always look at it as a Mobius strip. And I think too, the fact that the earlier ones were talking about, they were project focused, they were IT focused. And now the latest things that are coming out are all focused on the product. But originally, the old system development lifecycle for mainframes fit within the product lifecycle. So again, it's like, the pendulum swings too far one way and then it swings back. Not that I disagree with anything you said, it's just, it's not as cut and dried as we didn't have it and now we have it. It's sort of like, yeah, it kind of goes in iterations.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I mean, Agile had, Scrum in particular has kind of taken over as like, and, a lot of people who are newer to this think before Scrum, there was waterfall and everybody had this monolithic waterfall approach. It was not true. It's not true at all. Waterfall really, that paradigm kind of really took root in the 90s. Before that, there were people who had their own frameworks and methodologies, but a lot of them didn't. It was all over the place.
When I was writing a system development life cycle, I had to look at what was around, and I had some that went back to the 60s. And there must have been at least 20 of them. Some of them had 3 phases, and some of them had 20 or 30. But they were all trying to accomplish the same thing. They just split it up differently, and some of it applies if you're doing brand new development, and some of it doesn't apply if you're doing maintenance. And some of it you can do very easily with newer systems, but with the old mainframe systems, if you were making a change to a database, that was a huge effort to just add a stupid field to the database. Now you kind of point and click and you're done. But if you've got those old waterfall systems, those old mainframe systems, you're still going to have to do some of those additional efforts to get the mainframe systems to talk to the new stuff. So I get really stressed when I see people who've come from a class and they know it all, because there's one right way to do it. And anybody that I've ever talked to who's really an expert in Agile and has written books and implemented it in different places will say that if you're doing the same thing in 6 months, it's not Agile.
Yeah.
Because you've just codified it, and now you're not flexible. You're still not going to be responding to the next new challenge.
Yeah. 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 Each situation is unique. And so if you don't have that mental model of why you're doing what you're doing, you won't know how to adapt to the next situation.
I just feel like I need to say that every once in a while, that it wasn't just one thing ever, because there are a lot of people that think that because they just read it in a textbook because they weren't around to see it. And it's always been people trying to find the best, fastest way to get a consistent result. And that changes.
Yep. There's no best way. It always depends.
Well, the one that worked yesterday won't work tomorrow because something else will have changed in the environment.
Yeah.
Could be there's a new competitor that you now have to take into consideration, or it could just be that there's a system change, but it won't be the same.
I mean, that's what all the studies are showing. And we look at Coursera's yearly study, etc., of new skills. Competencies are going to be a value. You always have critical thinking and problem solving, but these two are very well defined in those reports. It's not just some fluffy 2 terms, critical thinking, like everybody tells you, yeah, I have a very open mind. What does that even mean? I have a multicultural mind. Then you work with them and you discover they can't even tolerate that you want to fast from once in a while. But what I'm talking about is those skills like critical thinking and problem solving. Again, going back to the same AI thing, I don't want to drag the discussion forever, but in fact, I also think that what Tom is talking about, the measurability of things, let's say, being able to quantify things, is a killer feature in many areas, because it could make long eternal discussions that sometimes span years of misunderstandings very concrete, because it simplifies and clarifies things to a degree that allows the beginning of a communication, of a conversation about something, instead of just talking about abstract concepts in people's minds and then thinking you understand what they say and just wanting to push your point through. You're actually talking about something concrete. So that could be a superpower move. Talking Dragon Balls terminology here, but that's just an opinion, nothing to do with your talk, Cliff. Just me jumping on what Tom and you were talking about.
I'd love to know how many people here have watched Dragon Ball Z. That was fantastic. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, I'm pretty old as well.
I remember it too, which means that I'm getting old too. All right, well, some very, very good thought-provoking discussions today. I'm sure that there is a lot of people leaving this meeting differently from when they arrive and probably thinking on things. Hopefully not for too long, because at some point we all need to go to sleep. But I think there are a lot of good ideas. I have a presentation to do next week for the IT department. And I'm definitely going to introduce some thoughts I got from here. So it was very valuable for me. I hope it was as much valuable for everyone as well. So I wanted to thank you all for taking your time and attending and staying for 25 more minutes, which requires dedication. So yeah, I didn't want to leave without thanking you all. The recording will be shared and you'll get a notification if you RSVP this event on Meetup. Otherwise, you can just, the link has already been shared, the YouTube link on this chat. You can just check the channel and get your recording there as well. All right. Well, thank you all again. And
Just
have a great... Yeah?
Well, a small idea for you, Ines, you and Cliff. Since you and most people I know here, Sheila, Tom, Mike, etc., I love books. I think we should all just start, just as a fun experiment, start a common Goodreads account library. We just, we can just click on books that we like, that we think are relevant for whatever Agile or quantification or competitive engineering. If you're talking about Tom's work, whatever, just add them there. I'd love to see what you guys are reading. I can't read from your video cams. I can't read anything. But if I look at them on a profile, it would be an interesting experiment to see what the community, since we're pretty small, people are reading.
That sounds
put it on a LinkedIn post.
Yeah.
Put it on a LinkedIn post. You'll get loads of people making suggestions.
And tag us. Yeah, I would like to see that.
All right, I'll do it now. Okay.
And then anything you guys want to share within this group, you can use the Meetup event. There is a comment section, and you can simply put the books there or leave any additional questions that you didn't have time to ask today, or any other links really. Tom made a lot of links, so Tom, if you want to put them there too, people can always share in later times. All right, I'm afraid I really
You may put them there yourself, but I'm leaving it at that. They're in the chat, which everybody can save.
Yep, true. Yep.
And you can email me and ask. That's also possible.
There you go. I wouldn't have said better. Thank you, Tom. All right, guys. Have a lovely rest of the day, and thank you all again. It was a pleasure. And see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.